It's time to go beyond the VHS to DVDs, although I suspect that's not what the title's going for. Hi guys, so I was absolutely up for a 7th VHS film when they announced it, and as of recording this video I have now watched it a couple of nights ago. I've actually been watching all the older VHS films recently as well because I've decided I'm going to do an updated ranking this year. I think the last time I ranked the VHS films there were only 4 of them out, and now there's 7 of them, so I think it's justified to do another ranking, but that's for another day. Today we're just concentrating on this newer entry. There are 5 mainline stories in this particular VHS film, and we've got a linking narrative as always. And in terms of talking about the movie, I'm going to take each of these stories in the order that they appear in the movie, which naturally means we will be beginning with the linking tale. Let's go. So, historically, this has always been the weakest part of this series, I would say. This was especially true early on. The first 2 VHS movies, the linking tales, are really schlocky and sleazy, and they don't really make any sense. And then in the middle of the series, things started to improve for a while. But then we got to one where the interludes were all of like toy soldiers playing or something, and I can't even remember what they did with the 6th entry, VHS 85, last year, because I must point out that at the time of doing this video, VHS 85 is the only one I haven't rewatched for my forthcoming ranking. But this one in this movie is actually pretty good. It's of a UFO sci-fi theme. So the title of this movie, VHS Beyond, it's a reference to going beyond the stars, beyond to distant frontiers. You know, it's a Star Trek Beyond type beyond, that type of beyond. And the little mini saga that plays out here is kind of good, actually. So there's like a guy who lives in this house, but he disappears, and it's thought that maybe aliens came to get him. And supposedly there are a couple of VHS tapes in existence which may prove this, but for some reason we can't watch these tapes until the very end of this movie. In the meantime, we get all these segments that are like interview clips and bits and bats and nothing that really relates to the main stories in any way, until we get right to the end, just before the closing credits. I spotted a link with one of the main stories, which I'm not going to talk about because I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but I'm not sure if I was just making this up in my head now, because I went onto Wiki after watching this film and there's no mention in the plot of this link that I personally spotted. So I don't know, I might need to watch this film a second time just to see if I'm going crazy or not. But there are no obvious links throughout this film between this UFO story and the main stories. But I still enjoyed it. I mean, there were times when certain clips were happening and my brain was still processing whatever main story had just finished. But still, this is one of the better linking stories in the franchise, definitely. Although my overall favourite is probably still the ice cream chase from VHS Viral. Note the spelling of the word stalk there. This is not about somebody being stalked. In fact, I'm not going to tell you what the title of this story means, but it's very much a Resident Evil homage, I would say. We follow this group of cops as they descend on this large house. It's got multiple floors and it's all gothic and spooky looking. There's definitely a Stars team vibe about these cops, though. And once they get inside the house, they realise that the whole place has been overrun by zombies somehow, and suddenly we're into this splattery chaos where zombies are dying much deserved deaths and the cops are all splitting up in their panic. Although overall I'd say the cops are quite efficient in this. I was expecting them all to die really quickly, to just leave one person, but actually they do quite well throughout this story, I'd say. There are a couple of big bosses eventually, just like it's a Resident Evil game, and the second one I'm not going to spoil. I'll let you have that moment where you're suddenly like, what the hell is that? But the first boss that comes much earlier on, I will tell you about. There's like a zombie in a high visibility jacket with a chainsaw and he's just swinging it round, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, this segment is pure action, but it's so enjoyable, and this is definitely a flying start to the anthology. There's not much better than this in the rest of this movie, in all honesty. This one is the weakest in the collection, I would say. It's kind of retreading old ground. So Dreamgirl is essentially doing the whole cute, mysterious girl who turns out to be a monster thing. And we've already had this more than once before in this franchise. So in the original film, there was that story with the girl in the hotel room, and it turned out that she could fly and she was some kind of succubus. Maybe I've got my monster terminology wrong there. And then in VHS 99, there was that story about the cute girl who lived across the street, but she turned out to be a Medusa and she went on a rampage. Well, this story here is essentially doing that kind of thing again, and it's just become a little bit tired at this point. So in Dreamgirl, there's this pop starlet who lives in India, maybe, and yeah, she's really famous, she's really hot, but there's clearly something wrong with her, and it turns out that she's a goddess who can cause unrivaled destruction and chaos if she chooses to. And she does choose to at the end of this story because of reasons. But it just feels like the bloodbath we get at the end of this feels really unearned. The whole thing just kind of bounced off me towards the end. I wasn't really into it. That's not to say that this story isn't entirely without merit. So I do like the fact that this takes place in India. I do like the idea of VHS stories taking place in different countries, not just all in America. And the culture change here is quite welcome. And I did enjoy the little pop number that the pop singer gives us at one point. I can't remember if we get a full song or just half a song, but I did enjoy that. But then once we got into the main thrust of the horror, it was all kind of predictable to me. So at this point of the anthology, I realised that we weren't getting a masterpiece this year, because that's always the hope going into any new VHS film. It's like, oh, are we going to get a perfect one this year where every story's brilliant? And this was the moment in this particular film where that notion was completely punctured, and it was like, yeah, well, if anything else, it's not going to be completely perfect. Live and Let Dive is a brilliant pun on the James Bond film Live and Let Die. So this is the title of a skydiving company, you know, where you pay to do a parachute jump. And at the start of this story, there were about 10 friends who were all about to do a jump together. So they're getting ready in this plane. They're not long off doing the actual jump. And then a UFO turns up out of the blue, which is kind of spooky when it happens because you don't expect it. And the UFO takes an interest in this plane, and the horror starts progressing from there. And I don't want to spoil where this story goes, but I will share with you a couple of the finer details. So we do eventually get some jumping, you know, we're not just teased with that, and eventually we get a whole section that takes place in a grove of orange trees, which is kind of cool because that is actually a really good location for horror. Now, for most of this, I was thinking, wow, what a great concept, and I was really enjoying it, and all was good with the world. And then the final few minutes, I feel like they just overdo it with the action and the blood and the chasing. It all gets a little bit excessive, actually. And if I could have changed anything about this segment, I would have taken off a bit of the never-ending action at the end of it and just had a little bit more of the tension and the build-up in the plane to begin with, because I feel like they just skimp over that a little bit in order to get to the juicier parts of this. So overall, I'd say this is kind of middle-of-the-road VHS. I mean, it's a great idea in theory, skydivers and UFOs. I wouldn't say that the idea is wasted, but it certainly could have done with just a little bit of fine-tuning, I feel. Fur Babies was directed by Justin Long, who you might remember as Bruce Willis's sidekick in Die Hard 4, and I can't remember seeing this actor in anything else actually, but here he is turning his hand to directing. So this is about a woman who owns this boarding kennels, but it's at her own home. So she's showing these people around the house, and she's trying to sell the idea to them of them leaving their dog in this place while they go to work or whatever. She's like, yeah, come and leave your dog here. He'll be walked and he'll be fed, and we like to play with the dogs here, and they'll have a great time until you come and pick them up again. You know, it's that sort of place. This woman who's doing the tour very much reminds me of a young Kathy Bates from Misery. And there's something seriously wrong with this boarding kennels. I'm not going to spoil the what, but there is some serious shit going on down in the basement, and I'll let you discover what that is. Now, for the second story in a row, it feels like we have a pretty great idea here that's a little bit underbaked. This story doesn't really get resolved, and I found that a little bit disappointing. There's a kind of cool little funny thing that happens right at the end, which I did appreciate, but I would have rather taken that out and had a more traditional horror ending. And I feel they would have done that if this had been a full-length feature, but because it's a short, they've just kind of left us dangling a little bit, and I found that a little bit disappointing and a shame, because the general idea behind this story is a pretty good one. So it's an averagey one, I'm afraid. Justin, the highlight of your career is still Die Hard 4, sorry. This is the fifth and final story, and for me, it's also the best thing in VHS Beyond. It was directed by Kate Siegel, who I guess is a fairly well-known actress now in the world of horror. The fact that she's married to Mike Flanagan just makes her a little bit extra visible than she might otherwise be, but she's tried her hand at directing it and done a damn good job at it. So this is another UFO-orientated one. So we've got this woman who's creeping around the desert at night looking for UFO evidence, and this is different already because most times you get UFO nuts in movies, they are nearly always male, so it's pretty cool to see a female UFO obsessive. And she's going around at night, she's spotting like lights in the sky and bits and pieces, and she's filming it all. And it's all kind of creepy. It reminds me of the McPherson tapes a little bit. And then at a certain point, she manages to get inside a UFO that she randomly comes across, and then we get the second half of the story, which takes place inside the UFO. And I'm conscious of how far to take the story, probably no further than this, actually. But there's some really clever science fiction writing that goes on once this character is in the UFO. I liked it a lot, actually. And this is actually the story that possibly links to the framing narrative, but I'm not 100% if I'm correct on that. Let me know your opinion in the comments if you made that same connection that I did. But I really liked this story a lot. I've kind of felt throughout VHS Beyond that there's a little bit too much emphasis on action. I mean, when I was watching the initial story, Stalk, I loved that one. But when that one was done, I kind of felt like I'd had my fill of mindless balls-to-the-wall action, and I just wanted different types of horror for the rest of the film. But then you get the bloodbath in Dreamgirl and another massive action segment with the skydiving one, and I just feel like there's a little bit too much emphasis on, you know, balls-to-the-wall stuff in this overall movie, but it just depends what your tastes are. But this one at the end of the film was a real blessing for me, definitely my favourite. It just appeals to my tastes personally, so I think you get good bookends to this movie. I think the two strongest stories are Stalk at the beginning and this one at the very end, and then there's kind of some averagey stories in the middle, but it's all subjective at the end of the day. You might see another review of this film by some other YouTuber tomorrow, and he might claim all the stories in the middle are great and the ones at the at the sides are not as hot. But there we go. But I liked this a lot. Stowaway, it was called. Very, very good. So there we have it then. We have arrived at the end of my review of VHS Beyond. I suppose I don't need to tell you that I don't own a copy of this because it's literally just come out on Shudder. Although I have recently bought copies of all the other films on Blu-ray. I've got all 6 of the previous ones actually, and I might show those off when I do my VHS ranking, which I'm hoping will come out in the next few weeks. But for now, let's get to the bag of terror and see how we're going to score this. So we got 1, 2, 3, 3.5 bloody axes out of 5. Pretty good film, and I am absolutely up for another one if they want to do it. So I guess we will find out pretty soon, I guess, whether we're going to get another release next year. As to how this one compares to the other VHS films, I'll leave that until I do my ranking. In the meantime, There's no reading update today because I have not finished another novel since I did my last review, so I guess this is goodbye for now. I will catch you all again next time. Bye-bye.